All right, here we go. Hello, and thank you for joining the second book chat in the Teaching Math Teaching Podcast No Guilt Book Club, where we are reading Reimagining the Mathematics Classroom by Cathery, Mark W. Ellis, and Carolee Koehn Hurtado. Today, we are going to discuss Chapter 3, the task-rich environment, and Chapter 4, the task-rich environment. Make sure I make that. And Chapter 4, the assessment-rich environment. My name is Joel Lamadon, and I am joined by my Teaching Math Teaching Podcast co-host, Ava Thanheiser. And we also have Cathery, Ruth Friedman Finch, Desiree Olivas, and Sienna Kemp. And thank you all for being willing to join us this evening or late afternoon, wherever we're at in the world. And maybe we can go around and do some quick introductions just in case, because we have some new faces from last time. So Ava, would you be willing to start?
I would. My name's Ava Thanheiser, and I am at Portland State University, and I am going to bounce over to Cathery.
Hi all, Cathery at Chapman University. So honored to be with three teachers, and Joel and Ava, but these three teachers who inspire me so deeply. They're exceptional.
Hi, I'm Desiree Olivas, and I'm an elementary school teacher. I still teach third grade, and I have my doctorate in math education, but I love being in the classroom so much that I've stayed there.
I'm Ruth Friedman Finch, and I'm an elementary school teacher. I teach third grade at Weaver Elementary School.
Ooh.
Yay.
Hi, I'm Sienna Kemp. I teach sixth grade math at Frontier Elementary in Peoria, Arizona. So shout out to any of my kids if you're watching.
All right. And so again, we're going to talk about, and I'm Joel Lamadon. I'm at the University of Mississippi, and I teach teachers elementary math methods, but love doing this stuff as well, where we get to bring some community together and get to learn a little bit from each other. Seeing some comments already coming in on the Facebook chat. Oh, they're coming in fast and furious now. And so we figured out some logistics of that from last time. So we're seeing your comments as they come in, and looks like Ava might be trying to reconnect to maybe stabilize that internet, but she'll be back in a second. But anyway, if you have some questions about Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, we can get to them. But yeah, it's so great to see so many people already with those comments, and so some of them we can just respond with our fingers, but we can also put them out for us to talk about with each other. There we go. There's Carolee even too. There you go. Awesome. Fantastic. So let's get started. Let's get into Chapter 3. And we were laughing a little bit before we started, and I think Chapter 3, when we're talking about the task-rich environment, and when I saw juicy tasks, and the reason why we were laughing is because last week I made this comment about the book kind of being like orange juice concentrate. There's so much in it, and Cathery's like, well, if you haven't read Chapter 3 yet, we're getting to the juicy part. So juicy tasks. I love the idea of juicy tasks. I don't know where did that name come from, but just this idea. Where the name come from, and then where do we go from there? Like how do we like this idea of coming up with this idea of juicy tasks?
So first of all, it came about because we wanted to buy jumpsuits, Juicy Couture jumpsuits, and have Mark wear one.
Awesome.
But truthfully, it came about, I'll be honest with you, about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years, because we wrote this book for over 3 years. We were in everybody's classrooms for 3 years. I was watching a Carl's Jr. burger commercial. You remember those burger commercials when it's so juicy, it's like leaking all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And then you get a remnant on your shirt, and then like an hour later, you want to like take a bite, So our thought is always, so Carolee's making comment around that, but our thought is always, when our kids are doing math, is it like that juicy burger where you're like savoring it, and then 3 hours later, you're still thinking about that burger, and you're like, it's on your shirt and you still want some of it,
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the way it should feel like for our kids when they're doing math. So that's where it came from.
I'm wondering if you can describe really briefly what a juicy task is.
Yes, especially, because, for people that haven't, because we're in the No Guilt Book Club, so people that might not have read it, and so they're like, what are they talking about with juicy task? But yeah, like what makes up a juicy task?
as Mark had shared last week, I make us write everything in threes. So you'll notice that's a constant pattern throughout the book. And everything we write and everything is always in three. So Juicy has three components. One is profundity. Mark wrote that word. I did not know it was a real word until Mark had it. But it's this idea that whenever we're doing math, every second should be on something that's profound. How are we using our time? It should be profound. It should engage in mathematics that's profound mathematics, important mathematics, but also important to them. The next one is elasticity. Going back to, eating that juicy burger, right? You would have to wear elastic pants. We know that our students come into our classrooms with a wide range of experiences and backgrounds and levels of comfort and love of mathematics with differing degrees. So the math we give has to honor and leverage that diversity. And that's why that elasticity is there. And then the last one is relevancy. We know the richest math and that in any concept, division of fractions to, we were talking about commutative and associative property at the middle school level. It should build from relevance to their lives and to prior learning. So those are the three: profundity, elasticity, and relevancy.
Does anybody have a favorite juicy task? So that's kind of our definition, like what an example of something like that, like, oh yeah, that's a juicy task.
I love one of the juicy tasks. I guess I love open middle problems because children can solve them multiple ways, and there's oftentimes a challenge that like using the digits only 1 through 9 only once. What is the lowest difference that you can make? And so sometimes they haven't quite reached that. And I say, I think I could get even lower. And they go home thinking about it, and they come in with papers the next day going, I solved it. I figured it out. It's leaving them wanting more. And one of the things I love that Kat always did when she would come in and do choral counting, and they're looking at the patterns and they're looking at different things, she'd stop at the very end and say, I'm going to leave you with a thought. Where would I land 3 rows over? Think about that. Or would I ever hit this number? Tell me why or why not. And they sit there and they don't want the task to end, and they're thinking and they're thinking, and it could be 2 days have passed and somebody will come back and say, I figured it out. So it's that wanting more.
I want to build on, because my goal today to be here is just to highlight these 3 people's brilliance and what they're doing so we can transfer it to our classrooms. Sienna Kemp and her colleagues have taken the choral counting to another level. They always start with context. The context where the choral count helps to uncover this in problem solving. It might be, for example, when Dr. Ye, in the old days, she would mow the lawn to make money, and she would make 25 cents per lawn. Okay, if she needs to make enough money to get to $5, like how many lawns does she need to mow? And then they would then lead the choral count. So that even the choral count itself is linked to stories from us and from ourselves, and in connecting to relevance. They started doing that, and it's been so lovely. I've learned from them so deeply.
Anybody else have a favorite juicy task, just to give a little bit more context? I love that idea of context with choral count. I'm writing things down. This is good.
I'll just build on the choral counts. My kids love the choral counts. I asked them for some middle of the year feedback a couple weeks ago, and I asked them what was working for them in the classroom and then what was not working for them or how I could serve them better in the classroom. And one of the kids put in all caps for serving and not serving with the choral counts. And then the explanation was, I love these because they're so fun. They get me thinking. And then the not serving was because they keep me up all night and I don't sleep because I'm thinking about your darn choral count. And then I have to tell you the next day what I thought of while I wasn't sleeping last night. So I think those are that juicy idea of what Dr. A was talking about they stay with you and leave you wanting more. So I'd have to say that's probably one of my favorites too.
Nice.
I can say everything I've ever seen in Ruth's classroom has been juicy. I have to say that. Like, because of our current context, I haven't been able to go to Ruth's classroom, and my heart aches. So we just text each other, and she shares images with me.
Okay.
But one of the things that I think Ruth makes everything so juicy is she looks at her hour, and everything builds on each other. And her students will have an hour conversation where the problems are always multi-layered. It's never just a simple answer. There's always multi-step. And they'll have an hour conversation all around their strategies and their thinking, and they're debating. And then she'll have a QR code and go, if you want to look up the answer, here's the QR code. And she just goes on. Like she's just like, next. And then she does it like, because Ruth is just so dramatic and expressive. She's like, next. And then she goes on. And you see a few kids going up because they want to know, but they're so in the heart of the debate. And they're so comfortable. It's also this idea that kids are not scared to make a mistake. So Ruth, you tell them everything you do is juicy too.
Again, most of the things have been inspired by you. You changed how I approach CGI, which used to be just the problems, and then to find that there are so many easy ways to incorporate it in a math talk, in a math discussion that leads up to the CGI problem, so that it all does build to that next level, that then they have strategies to take forward into that CGI problem, so that everyone has a level of success. And by offering them multiple number choices for them to feel comfortable playing with the numbers and figuring it out. But as well, it's not always about the answer. It's how did I get there? And so I'm more than happy to put a QR code. Some don't want the surprise ruin. They're like, I need to figure it out on my own. So it was, how do I accommodate both? Saying, if you want the answer, here it is. But if you want to work through it and embrace that struggle and figure out and see if you're right, I won't give it away yet. So that's why the QR codes would be up on the wall if they needed to check, or if they wanted to know ahead of time.
That's why, I mean, I love that whole idea, Ruth, like how you're doing that, allowing them to struggle, allow them to, because, if we're talking about reimagining the math classroom for some that might have a very traditional like view of a math class, like, wait, she's not, you could tell the answer, like that's like, I mean, that's a huge shove for some people, like that you're doing that. And then, so it's like, well, what is the point? And like, I see some, Carolee mentioned in the, more comments, I keep moving up, but they're doing math for the love of math, not just an assignment, right? It's not just, I got it right. Like I got credit. And like, no, I'm learning, I'm engaging, I'm building these connections. It's one of those, it's like why you have this book, right? We're reimagining what it could be to actually engage in this idea of what it is to do mathematics, right?
Can we ask a hard question?
Well, we can ask plenty of hard questions. You can ask a hard question. Yes.
What does it mean to engage in juicy tasks right now? And I think these three teachers are so perfect because they're actually in three different learning environments. And that's why there's intentionality as well. So they represent the repertoire of, I think Ruth is teaching in person, but having to engage in social distancing and the required spacing.
Yeah.
Anna is teaching in hybrid. She has some students in person, some students online, and she needs to teach both at the same time. And I think Desiree is still completely online. So,
wow. Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah.
So what would that look like? What are you doing? What are some recommendations? And for folks in the group, in the chat, to share out too. What does it mean right now to do that work? And what are some resources?
It is really different, and I have to admit, going into it, I'm watching teachers do it and meeting with teachers, and I'm surprised. I'm like, you're trying to do the same things that you're doing in the classroom in the same way that you're doing in the classroom, right? With their books and their writing, and that is. I'm amazed because that doesn't, it's not going to provide a different, we have to change the mindset of how we're going to still get to those layered problems, those juicy problems, getting kids to think instead of what they tend to do, because like Ruth comes from a wonderful culture on her campus of math. But when you come from like a mixed culture, like on my campus, you have teachers who are teaching kids to like just write the answers, right? There's not a lot of profundity, there's not a lot of depth of thought into what kids are doing. Kids are not thinking about their learning, right? So they're doing it. And so in this environment, getting them to think about their learning was really challenging. Like, oh my gosh, you just put the answer. Well, can you show me with your board? And the whiteboards are great, but I can't see what the kids are doing. So I've had to go to virtual whiteboards and use websites so that I could see everybody's board at the same time and give them immediate feedback. And then the kids can see each other's boards and each other's thinkings. So that provides for that diversity of learner. You know, the kids who need the picture, and then they can look at the kids, go, oh my gosh, I could have drawn a diagram like that. Or, oh my gosh, that my friend over there, he wrote his whole explanation out, and those kids can see that. And oh, that kid actually drew a picture. You know, he modeled it a different way. So that is kind of get a little breakthrough. It's taken a long time to get that breakthrough, longer than I have if I were on campus. It's taken me longer to get kids to move into, oh my gosh, I have to show her in words and diagrams and arrows, however I could, what is going on in my head and how I'm getting to what I'm doing and how I'm processing what I'm doing, instead of just putting the answer to you know, whatever they think the problem is. And the whole idea of like thinking about the problem, like sentence by sentence, and getting what do we know about this and what do you need to know, has also been a real process. But I've had to like resort to, I'm like, you know what, I want to see all your thinking, and I want you to see your thinking. So I use the program that lets all the kids see each other's work, and so they can see each other's work while they're doing it at the same time too. So I always I've resorted to those platforms that let me do that with the students, and that way they can go back and forth. Because I'm missing the whole manipulative thing, right? I'm missing the whole hands-on thing. And I work in a really, really poor neighborhood, as Cathery knows. And so that's like killing me, that I can't get kids to hold on to things. And then their environment doesn't let them do that either, because it's a very limited environment. So it's like, let's go to your Google Classroom. And I've set up a little math laboratory in my Google Classroom, so kids can go to the little math lab and pull out a tool from the from the cabinet. And so that leads them to at least show me the virtual tools, so that they can build the concepts as they're going, so they can move through that whole process. So it does look very different. It's slow. I don't know about anybody else who's doing it online, Sienna. Yeah. It's slow, but, and I know I'm moving slower than other teachers, but the kids like stay with me. They will do math for the whole hour. Believe it, they will do math for the whole hour. I'm amazed. I'm like, okay, we're done now. But we do, but I'm not done with this. So it does look different, and I can still do I still have a hard time with the choral stuff, because that's not working. It doesn't work. So I just have to trust them, and that's kind of a neat thing too, is that I have to trust them. I have to trust that they're doing that with me. I have to just even go to the next step. You know, we believe kids can do. We believe kids have mathematics, right? We believe they come to my classroom with tools already. I just need to get those tools and work with them. So I have to like take that other next step of believe them that they're doing it with me, that they are going through those processes and counting and doing. I mean, even if I can't see them or I can't hear them, I have to believe that they've seen me do the routine and be all silly with them, so that they can also like believe that that's okay. Let's just do this together. Does that kind of give you an idea of the struggle? And the struggle is real. If it was a struggle before, I mean, if you've come into my classroom before, it's a struggle because I get kids from all different levels. It's a struggle for all of us, even me. We're like, oh my gosh, are we going to get this? But let's struggle. Let's continue to struggle tomorrow. But it's even a greater struggle. So sometimes we'll struggle with a problem for like 2 days, and we'll come back to this tomorrow. So it's difficult. It's difficult, but it's still fun to see.
To build on what Desiree just said, I completely agree about the not being able to do exactly what you do in the classroom online. And then one of the challenges is that, so like Cathery said, some of my classes are online, some are in person, and then I actually have an hour where I'll have some kids in my room, but then I'm also with the kids online. And then what they're having the kids do is if they do get sent home for any reason, if they get sick, then instead of being an in-person class, they jump into the online class. So we have to be in the exact same place at all times, but everything's slower online, like Desiree was saying. And so I think that's where that piece of like less is more comes in. But when we do less is more, we have to be so intentional about the activities that we do choose to do and make sure that they're so juicy so that we are still getting like the most out of our time with our students. And some of those apps, like the whiteboard apps, I love the whiteboard.fi. That one's my favorite. The kids really enjoy it. And then I'm able to see what they're doing on their whiteboards. I can share their whiteboards with other students so they can see each other's work. And then I can also like toggle my whiteboard to them so they're able to see that at the same time as they're working. So I think just being really creative with these. Oh, thank you. Cathery just put it in the chat. Getting creative with these online tools, and then also for the students who are virtual and at home, really making use of all of the math that exists around them naturally in their home. So if they don't have manipulatives at home, they might have graham crackers. And so then if we're doing fractions, like please go grab your pack of graham crackers or your club crackers or like whatever you have that we can, break apart and put back together, or a chocolate bar or whatever it is in your house that you have. And really, I think it's been a beautiful way for them to see how much math really does exist in their homes and around them. And it's been there all along. And now this is how we're realizing it's there. So,
I want to say that building on, I've had a chance to see Sienna teach, and her students have made tremendous gains this year. Like it's been life-changing for all of us. And I think what's something so beautiful that Sienna does is she constantly uses ways for students to participate and communicate beyond verbal ways, because it's so much slower in a group, in a whole class setting for kids to mute and unmute. And then also Wi-Fi is really sketchy. So sometimes you can't even hear them. So she's so good about using these other ways of seeing their thinking, like the Whiteboard-Fi or Nearpod Pear Deck to support, or Jamboard, so that they can see each other's work. And then one of the things that she and Ruth and Desiree all do is one of the things that I always say is the person who starts should never finish. So Sienna may share someone's work, and then that person's work is intentionally not yet 100% done, and have others build from that. And then making very explicit around, like what Desiree said, this connection across representations. That to know math, it's not that, abstract numbers are the most sophisticated, but you really want them to understand all concepts across mathematical representations. So it's been so joyful to see all three of them and how they do that. Ruth, share your awesomeness.
Oh, I was going to say the struggle is just as real and just as hard hybrid, because occasionally you have somebody who, has to quarantine or is out and they're gone for 2 weeks, but then they don't have a place to go online. I had to quarantine for 2 weeks. So I had to make sure that what I had for my students was just something similar to what I would be doing. So they hear the same language and they're getting the same experience. So of course I do a lot with Google Slides, and I was really excited today. I'm going to throw another shout out to Open Middle. When I went on, and they've developed for every grade level, all of it on Google Slides, the problems that can be interactive. So to make a copy for each of my students of that slide and say, okay, now go drag and try it. Flip grids, great way to say, here's a solve me mobile, put it into my flip grid, explain your rationale and justify it, and then show the different students sharing their thinking to the class. It's been going a lot slower, and you can't use the same manipulatives unless they bring it in, because you can't have children share and you still have to keep them 6 feet apart. And so we go outside, and how do we do it outside? And let's play a game or do something that involves math and looking at the world around us. The real world is amazing, and everywhere you look, there's math. And so if I'm right now moving into multiplications and arrays, and look in the room, what do you see that's set up that way? How can we look at the world and see math? And quick images was a life changer for me. And one of my favorite ones is when Kat brought in, it was a quick image, I think grapefruits cut in half. And I was looking at it with the pink and the green. And so I was looking at them as wholes. And one of my students goes, "You are so wrong, Mrs. FF." I go, "I am." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Those are cut in halves. Those are all halves. So your total is completely different." And I went, "Oh my gosh, they are halves." So I love listening to students speak and giving them that opportunity where they take control of the conversation simply by showing them a picture and seeing all the different ideas. And how do you see this array? How do you see it set up? So the interactive rec and recs that I can put up on a whiteboard and then circle the different ways that people see it has been a lot of fun for them. And how are you seeing this array? And then we get into partial products and how you can use partial product plus a partial product to find the whole product using arrays, which will then take us into area, not only just area model, but area and perimeter for geometry. So much, like I said, changed for me when I share ideas with other people like we're doing right now. Because I'm going to go home and look up whiteboard.fi as soon as we're done with this.
Yeah, I love that Cathery's putting all these links in there. So that's like good. We got a document to go back into to explore.
Can I just give one more share out? Shelby and Olivia's in the audience. They've been integrating context as the start of all math problems. Like, it always starts with context, and then they embed children's literature. So then you're working on literacy and mathematics at the same time. It's this idea that math is not linear. It's not like discrete skills. Well, math shouldn't just be taught by itself. So they have and they've been using, they've been combining math content standards with the teaching tolerance social justice standards. Nice. So they're pairing children's literatures that honors children's identities and diversity, and then pulling where the math is naturally in place in context. So I'll later on share a page where their math, like that's the children's literature and the math tasks already embedded in that they've created. I thought that was just, the work they've done is so beautiful and powerful, that we don't have to just see math as math, right? Math is a tool to help us make sense of the world. So that's integrate them. So shout out to Shelby and Olivia in the audience for doing that.
Kat, that made me think of the chapter 3, and like Lisa So, who teaches with me at the time, we were doing the keeping quilt. And so that they could get a visual that these quilts are patchwork and you have your square units within it. And that's what led to that problem. And I think one of the things that you shared with me that I've loved the most, I guess a GC task, are bet lines. And so to begin so many of my math problems with a bet line that allow, and I have quite a few this year actually, second language students who maybe struggle in reading, to lift that burden off of them and to say, just tell me what you think my problem is going to be about mathematically. And immediately, if you get somebody who's way off task, I have to go back and redirect, but it opens them up. They get excited about the problem, and then it usually always relates to the bet line, but I'm using it with the literature that we've just read as well.
Ruth, can you explain the bet line just for those that might not, just again, the no guilt part, just in case they haven't read it? But
sure. My example of the bet line that I'm doing right now is it's the story called The Mushroom Man, and he works in a mushroom farm. So the first thing I have is, what do you bet my problem's about? And I have a mushroom man, and they're like, it's how far he has to work to the mushroom, to go to the mushroom farm. It's great. That's distance. It's measurement. Fantastic. And then my next picture might be, he works with all different types of mushrooms. How many mushrooms he's working with, Mrs. F. You're going to add up all the mushrooms. No, you're going to subtract a certain amount of mushrooms. Somebody, how much do mushrooms cost? So you're seeing that these kids are automatically thinking mathematically. And then it led into each of the containers are planted are in perfect squares, and they're all lined up in perfect rows with this many mushrooms in each container, and there's this many rows, and they're like, oh, how many mushrooms are going to be total using an area model? And that, you know, so then it gets to my problem, which also was with their literature, and I did it with The Fisherman and His Wife as well, which are junior grade books, so it goes with their interpretive thinking. And I love that everything's kind of being brought together into one giant ball. Literature, writing, math, encompasses it all.
Love it. Well, I did want to ask too, I mean, just because, again, going back to this idea of juicy tasks, and there's, you know, you have we talked about the 3 things that make up a juicy task, and now okay. But some people might be sitting there, you know, watching this like, you know what, I heard an example of a juicy task, and, you know, I have these, you know, general ideas, but like, you have some stuff in the book about how do you make problems that might be available to me, like through a textbook, how we could make them juicy. Or we also know that there's places you can go to get some juicy tests too. I know we've been posting some links too. So either one of those 2 things, how do you take something that you already have and how do you make it juicier? I think to address that, but then also too, to think like, where are places, if there haven't been mentioned so far in the chat, that you might get some juicy tasks.
I'll be honest.
Okay.
No,
Another one I love that have juicy tasks set up for you is Robert Kaplansky, but also 3-act tasks, which my students absolutely love. And it starts with a video and it asks, what did you see? What do you think? Then it has another question for you to prompt them with. And then there's an act 2 and then the final act, and to build upon each of the things. And it allows them to really start to think beyond just the original act.
I just want to say one. I think at first this might sound really intimidating for some educators if they've never done this and they've never engaged in a juicy task before. And I really just encourage you to try one. Like, even if it seems a lot to do this every class period, every day, just try it once and you'll feel, it's a feeling in your classroom, and you can feel the difference of when kids are engaged in a juicy task versus just something. The best analogy I can think of is like a loaf of white bread on the shelf at the store versus, I know everyone's been doing these sourdough starters during quarantine. And I feel like a classroom that's filled with juicy tasks is like that sourdough starter, and it's full of life and it's bubbly and it's vivacious and there's a little bit of uncertainty and you're not always quite sure exactly where it's going to go. And sometimes it gets really messy, like when your starter overflows on your counter and then it's dripping on the floor. And sometimes you have to bring it back. But there's a feeling that goes with these juicy tasks, and there's so much joy that comes out of it. And it's an entirely different classroom to walk into. I think you can feel it the instant you walk into a classroom of what kind of tasks the students are engaged in. And so I really just encourage people to try it once, and you'll feel the difference, and then you won't be able to go back.
For teachers who are starting out, you know, you could go to your text as step 1, and you know, brilliant educators have written those texts. There's nothing wrong with taking one of those problems from the text and just presenting it without the numbers, or adding another story on top of it, below it, or underneath it, to get kids really into the problem and making it theirs, or changing the context of some of those problems so that it's relevant to the kids and where they live and how they live. those kids, my students love when it's all about them. When the problem and the story, oh, we read the story about this little person in this little neighborhood. I can't remember all the books that we started off with, but now we're doing math, and let's put it in a math context. And so kids really, so just for teachers who are starting off like this, and you still, you're still with your math textbook, well, choose a few select problems from that textbook that would invite kids for in-depth conversations where kids can really chew on it and think about it and struggle with it without you jumping in and telling them, oh, look, this is how you do it. Or this is how to think about it. The first step is, and the journey is, watching your students struggle with the problem and observing which students have what struggles and what strategies, and then bringing those out so other kids who don't seem to have a place to start can find a place to start among their peers.
I really
go ahead, Cathery. Sorry.
I really appreciate how Desiree is saying this, because I think I don't think teachers should spend every day looking for rich tasks. I think that's overwhelming. And also, math learning is not about one task. It's about a progression of learning experiences. I think textbooks are not bad. It's like my only thing is, it's like going to the buffet. You should not eat all of it. Right? The textbook is like a buffet. So we have to be very judicious about what we eat. Like, I always eat dessert first. So we find the dessert in the textbook. And what I often say is, find the context-based problem and add relevance to it, include a bet line, and then take out the number choices and provide a set of number choices that build from what children know, so that it's honoring where they're at. So there's a lot of potential. There's so much there that we can build from, but not feeling that we have to stick to it, and do, I think that, like what Sienna said, less is more. Realizing, I think this is the time for us to really think about what do we want our students to leave with when they leave us. I think about that daily as a human being. What are we really focusing on? And then how do we really support them to develop those dispositions where they feel math is joyful and that they see themselves as mathematicians? So I would say it's less what we're doing, but how they're getting a chance to do it so that they see themselves and their brilliance as part of it. And the teacher's brilliance, because teachers are so brilliant. They are so brilliant.
Well, I'm seeing it's 7:09. I did want to get to the next chapter. I'm just curious. I know Ava sometimes she's got that rock star question coming, but I don't know if I just set her up. But Ava, you got anything that you want to share before we move on to the next chapter? Or if anyone else has anything they want to share about this chapter?
I do have some questions, but I think it makes sense to kind of move on to the assessment piece and hear from these three teachers. I particularly am enjoying hearing the experiences that the three of you can share with us that potentially we can walk away with and try something out. So I've already been noting down things. Thank you so much for sharing. And so while I do have questions, Joel, I'm not sure that, I think I would rather hear, if we're transitioning to assessment, if you could each take a few minutes to just share how you think about it and maybe one example for the listeners, watchers, viewers, I don't know.
I was looking at the comments and then I missed part of what you said. I just know I'm supposed to comment on something. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just go last and I can figure it out. When you say the beginning parts of your comment, I was distracted by Farshid and Michelle because I love them so much.
I think I was just prompting the Ruth, Sienna, and Desiree to share a little bit about assessment and maybe some of their favorite assessment activities. And I don't know if I should suggest an order, or if you guys want to just jump in.
Oftentimes, my assessment can be a CGI problem to see, and one that they've been familiar with. And I want to see, what are they doing if I leave it completely on their own? And it'd be the one time maybe I wouldn't engage in a discussion with them and share the ideas, because I want to see, what did they get? What do I need to go back and maybe reteach, or go back and explain differently?
Ruth,
Because I always feel like that's me.
Ruth, can I interrupt for a second? Sorry. I'm wondering if everybody in the audience or who will view it later knows what a CGI problem is, or whether you could maybe explain that.
Sure, it's cognitively guided instruction,
it.
and it's a philosophy that basically that children come in with their own ready-made strategies, and some of them might be direct modeling, and then they move on to counting on or counting back, and then they work into flexible numbers and being able to use, compensation, or really look at numbers and use the strategies such as associative property or the distributive property, and they get those ideas. So it's creating a word problem. The traditional sense of what CGI, when I was first trained in it, oh my God, 20 years ago, with a set of numbers, and I'd have different number choices so that the students can choose what numbers they feel most comfortable with as well. And the word problem, I would usually involve one of my students, and an activity that we might be doing in social studies. I weirdly enough, I was going through my cabinets earlier when we used to go and study about peanut production and how they grew and then picked and that. And so it was, farmer, and it was one of my students, Jenny planted this many peanut plants and it produced this many peanuts, while farmer Craig, planted this many and he produced that. How many did they have altogether? And so it's a joining, there's multiple different types of problem types. This is, of course, the most common one, which was part, bringing it together, joining, and to see, what are they doing with that? Are they direct modeling? Are they having to draw out all of the peanuts? Can they use something else to represent the peanuts? So I would have kits when they were problem solving that might have decks of cards, little teddy bears, hundreds boards in there. As I go into third grade, I try to take those manipulatives away to see, what can they produce without that? How are they using numbers? Are they still drawing the base 10s? Are they able to maybe use the actual numbers? What do they know about the numbers? And so it opens my eyes to the students. At the end of a CGI problem, on a normal time, I would have students share their strategies. And then I'd say, more than one, maybe, how are these similar? How are they different? And sometimes I pick a student who didn't complete the problem, going, how do we get them to the next step? Oftentimes, and I think it's in the book, Cathery, I put them into groups and say, partway through, go and talk about where you're at with your group, which would allow me to go around and listen to more students speak. They learn to question each other. I can hear different strategies, and then I can pull from there, once I've heard the different strategies, to go, where do I want my class to go? Where does somebody who maybe is right on that cusp of not drawing the exact little one-to-one direct modeling, who has that next strategy so they could see it, then pull somebody who has a really flexible strategy and say, okay, now let's hope the next student sees that. So they're building on top of each other. They're talking to each other. They're questioning each other. So if I'm going to assess them, I might give them almost the exact same problem because I want to build on it. But this time I wouldn't have those discussions. I want to say, what did you get from that? Let me see. And then what do I need to go back and reteach? So that's one of the ways I would use a type of assessment.
I think all three of us are CGI teachers, right? I'm guessing, yeah. I think I'll win the prize though. I've been doing it for a long time. I've been teaching for like a zillion years, it feels like. But I know over years, I do take anecdotal notes on my kids as I'm roaming through the classroom, like when I'm in the classroom. And so now that I'm not, it's easy for me to see the screen and take notes on the kids that, oh my gosh, this child is at this level and this child's at this level. But I know one of the joys of assessment, if you can call it, was interviewing kids. So there's like that one problem I would get, right? The change problem. And it depended upon what grade level I was teaching, but I would do it with the K1 and 2, and then the third grade I might change it up to a multiplication, but still get that subtraction in there to see what each kid can do. If just with an interview, without, here's the problem. How would you solve this? To see what they're going to do. Do they understand this problem? And I have like this little routine that I follow. Well, if they get to this level, I wonder if I give them this problem type, can they solve this problem type? And if they solve that one, I'll take them to the next level. If they solve that one, if they get that hard change problem, then I might want to see what kind of numbers, where's their place value then? So then I can interview them to see where their place value is by just changing the numbers in the same problem. I can tell, like, well, how can they get their head around that change over tens, right? Or working with hundreds. So that's one way, and it is a really fun way, a really informative way, and very non-threatening way for me to get the information I need for where my kids are in mathematics without the testing and the that kind of pressure of, I got to take this test. There's so much that we have to do on purpose in our districts on the testing, that to truly see what kids are doing in their head and mathematically and processing, those interviews and those observations that we make as teachers based on what we know how kids think are really, really helpful, and really do show what they can really do.
If you haven't been trained in CGI, the questioning is the key part on the teacher and the students and modeling that. But what's wonderful that has come out of CGI in those questionings, you find that it carries over across all disciplines. So you find even when you're talking about a story, suddenly the way you question students change. And when I question them about their writing, that has changed as well, because CGI has really taught me to question and to listen and to build from where they're at and how do you take them beyond. So it's really neat that the same type of question, like, what were you thinking? Where do you think you're going to go from here? Can you show me a different way? What do you think about this person and what they thought? Who can explain to me in a different way what that student just said? And having multiple kids explain it differently, than the hopes that one person will go, finally somebody said it the way that I could see it. And I think I called Kat the other day. I said it was such a great moment in the class when I did a quick image and somebody was getting the doubling and halving right away. And I'm like, the question I wanted to ask him was on the tip of my tongue so that other kids could see what he was doing. And I'm like, I just couldn't think of it. And I got home that night. I'm like, I know what I should have said. So, as a teacher, I always teach them that I'm not perfect and I'm going to make mistakes. You guys feel free to make mistakes, because that's where the true learning happens. And a true mathematician isn't somebody who could solve a problem quickly. It's somebody who can analyze. It's somebody who can make a mistake. But if they do, they know how to go back into their work, see where they made their mistake, verbalize it, and be able to go forward from there. And that a lot of math problems are not meant to be solved in a single moment or two moments. So it's not about memorization. And so another thing I love to do is error analysis and deliberately give a problem that has a mistake. And what was the mistake that I made? And how do you know? And how can you prove it to me? So those just questions. How do you know? How can you prove it?
Can I just say, in Ruth's class, you see students raise their hands, and then she calls on them, and you think they're going to give an answer, and they're raising their hand because they caught their mistake. She does that repeatedly, and then she celebrates that. She stops the class, and they cheer for that student. So they're so eager to share it when they caught themselves, like, oh, I did this instead. Just want to call out little moves that you all are doing. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, everything that they both just said is incredible, and I agree completely and do a lot of those things. And I think that in this virtual setting, it's really challenging to authentically assess kids. And I think that these technologies where we're able to see their whiteboard, whether it's on Peer Deck or the whiteboard app or whatever application you're using, but then also understanding that some kids are not going to unmute themselves in a full group, and making use of breakout rooms and things like that so that they're able to share with a smaller group like they would be in a classroom, and then build that comfort level. And then when they come back into the full group, saying, can someone from this breakout room share what the discussion was, so that even those students who are not comfortable unmuting and sharing verbally are either able to share through the chat or have their ideas expressed by classmates who were in their breakout room with them. And then just a few little things, like I was putting not a ton of students in each breakout room, thinking that it would be more intimate, but then I started realizing that not all students who get put in the breakout room are actually participating, and they might have walked away from the computer. So putting 7 or 8 kids when I was putting 3 or 4, hoping that 3 or 4 of them are actually still there participating in the breakout, things like that you just kind of figure out as you're going. But then there are also, a lot of my students are older, so then they're able to share their screen and we're able to look at their work. And I always kind of pre-screen and then deliberately ask students who I think their work really targets our learning goal for the day to share out their screen so that it supports our learning goal. And then the class as a whole can analyze their work, and we can talk about what they did, and kind of like what Cathery was saying about Ruth. If a student did make an error, celebrating them and thanking them for helping the entire class learn and making that okay. And I think that takes a lot of effort to build that in from the beginning, and it's not something that happens right away, and it's not something kids are going to be comfortable with right away. But I think if you're very intentional about making that a celebration of learning, they get comfortable with it, and they're excited that they helped everyone see something that maybe they wouldn't have seen before.
Can I just highlight I told them that my day-to-day was just to highlight their brilliance. And all 3 of their description, when you ask them about assessments, it goes back to the Latin base of the word assessment, which means to sit by. When we think about the Latin base of the word assessment, means to sit by someone. And all of their examples provide different ways where we can sit by a student, virtually, in person, to really listen to their thinking, to honor their thinking, and then to build from it. And for them to be able to, because assessment's not just for us, it should be for them and for each other. And they all named out, because assessments should not be Joel's all like this. I agree. I wonder how often right now assessments is only used to provide information for teachers. And that all 3 of them gave examples of when assessments are used for each other, for the child, and for their peers, so that they're given feedback and they're building and able to learn from each other. So I just want to call that out and how amazing that is.
Thank you. One last thing, sorry. I think the self-assessment piece is so important and something that can be challenging online. And one of my absolute favorite things to have the kids do after each activity or whatever we're doing, I just ask them to put an emoji on their whiteboard of how are you feeling about this? How do you feel like you're ready to move on? Or do you feel like we need to do another problem? And they get really creative, but for the most part, I can interpret what they're feeling based on their emoji, but they're so willing to do it. And even the kids who aren't always engaging in what we're doing, they will put an emoji on their board. So that self-assessment piece, I think, is important too.
Now, I guess just to the whole self-assessment, I don't know if anyone else has something to say about that. just the idea of what is maybe a small step, and I know there's lots laid out within the book, but like small steps that someone like, how do I do that? How do I, turn, so like, it's not just information for me. It's not just information for the grade book or something I need to report. It's like, there is the circle, and you use the circle at the beginning part of the book. Like there's, that there's something that's going to cycle back towards the student. Like what are small things that you do or could be done for someone that's like, whoa, maybe I haven't thought about that.
When I was in the classroom and the kids were working on their problems on their sheets, if they were working if I gave them a problem sheet, we talked about the whole thinking behind their learning. Like, how are they learning? What is you doing? You learn. How did you process the problem? So all the steps that they went through. What was your problem solving? What was your language? So put it in kid language. So they had these little, I guess, boxes in the bottom, right, of the problems where they can think about. Oh my gosh, well, I was really precise in my calculations, but I need to work on my mathematical dialogue. So they had like these little 4 boxes in the bottom where, they can talk about their mathematical expressions, right? Did they use numbers? Did they use a variety of numbers? How they express themselves in words? What was their process? Like, did they feel like real confident? Could they explain what they did to another child? And how they put it in paper, right? Right, they wrote it down and expressed themselves. Because some kids are really good about verbalizing to another friend what they did, but when it gets down to the writing part, they really struggle. They need, hey, can you write this down for me? And I'll copy it into my paper, right? So that was one way the kids kind of got into a habit of self-evaluating. So they can think about, okay, I need to work on this area in mathematical practices. Does that make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I started that a long time ago, and now I have to admit, I have to move into the mathematical practices, like putting like 2 or 3 on the bottom of that page so that kids can think about their thinking and think about their learning. And set goals for themselves. So in their math notebooks, they set goals for themselves every 4 weeks or every unit, so they can go back. Oh, I did it. Oh, I wasn't so good, Miss Oliva. I'm going to need some help right here. Yeah. But it also happened.
I also want to give a shout out to Mark, as Mark took the lead in chapter 4, and I really loved how he unpacked different ways of mathematical knowing into math notations and facts. Conceptual understanding, procedural understandings, and SMPs. I think if each of us were to go back and look at our assessments from those 4 lenses and see when we're assessing kids and the type of questions you're asking, which of the 4 are you hitting upon? And are you really heavy on one instead of the other, right? Just starting from there. And he gives beautiful examples of sometimes giving an example and a non-example. So it's moving beyond a right or wrong, and then having students explain. Because I'm thinking right now around how much anxiety all of us teachers and students have. I've seen too many kids cry right now over assessments.
Yeah.
I think all of our social emotional stress is high. So even starting from there.
Yeah, I like how you said that originally, Cathery, with the sit by, the root. I never had heard that before, but then versus some might see as assessment to judge, right? Or even to use the word test, like I am testing whether or not that, like there's some language issues there, but thinking about what's the purpose of this. Well, I see it's 7:30 and I want to honor people's times, and this time just flew right by, but just thank you so much for being. I don't know if anyone had any final thing that you're like, I really want to share this before we turn loose.
I was going to say, if you're first starting out, I had the little checklet, like who was the self-starter, who needed me to help them get started, were they direct modeling, and it was just a checklist, so I could go by and go, okay, check, they've self-started, and run around the room, check, they are direct modeling, check, and then you can look back on your notes later, and then the ones, of course, who I interviewed with that day, I'd have a little bit more heftier notes for that day, because you can't get around necessarily sometimes and interview every single kid on that day, and don't try, because it will drive you crazy.
Never. You never get around university.
But an easy way to see what people are doing during that time. And then you have the kids, you have to set up, ideas that don't come interrupt me. And so maybe have challenge, like now that you've done this, see if you can write the answer in expanded notation, see if you can write it this way, see if you can round it, different things to expand it so they have something to do while I'm still going around and looking at what other people are doing. And then that they're not off task. Or if two people are done, go talk to each other, share your strategies, see who maybe had a more efficient way of solving it and why do you feel that way. And then later I will ask you which one solved it more efficiently and why do you feel that was a more efficient strategy than the other strategy being used.
And the one more thing too, kids need to be together. Like, I know that my district says, oh, we got to put the kids in groups because it's visual learning and blah, blah, blah. But I tend to mix them all up because they help each other a lot, especially if you're in a virtual environment. And so this like tracking all low kids and putting the kids in here in that group, that's not helpful.
No.
And that's not building the kids up who need that extra, oh, I could do this. My friend did it. They showed me how to do it. I could do this too. And that's what we want to see. So that's one thing we don't talk about a lot, but I think it's important kind of perspective that a lot of good math teachers like go in the classroom and mix them all up and strategically put certain kids with certain kids based on what the child is and who the child is. And, some kids don't have anything to do with it, right? But a lot of kids want to jump in and help and be a coach and not a teller. And I've watched that over the years too. They become coaches. In fact, we called it in our classroom, math coach. Who's going to be the math coach for today?
Anything else before we sign off? All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Cathery. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Desiree. Thanks, Sienna. Thanks, Ava, for everyone sharing their time and expertise. Thanks to all of you out there for joining for this second book chat in the Teaching Math Teaching Podcast No Guilt Book Club. If you are enjoying this conversation and you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Teaching Math Teaching Podcast. Shameless plug here. We'll have an episode toward the end of December that will wrap up this No Guilt Book Club. And you can join us next week. We're same time and same place where we will be discussing Chapter 5, Extending the Classroom, Families and Communities, and Chapter 6, Moving from Vision to Reality, Bringing the Elements Together. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Night.